Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Politician Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ray Hennessy, and today we're joined with our lovely researcher, Trex Jones. Today we're talking about the post-election, basically what the state of mainly Congress is, Trump's first actions as the president-elect, mainly who's filling out his cabinet, and a few other things that relate to what will become of the next 4 years. So first, let's talk about the House of Representatives. Right now, the GOP has the majority at 218 seats, while the Democrats lag closely behind at 213, which means that in total, there are about 4 seats that haven't been accounted for. Trex, what can you tell me about those remaining seats?
So the 4 seats right now in Iowa's one, they're actually being recounted, and we'll have those results pretty soon. There's California District 13, which is at 96.3% reporting.
Can I ask you, you said Iowa or Illinois?
Iowa.
Iowa. Could you tell me what the current count is right now? Who's leading?
The current count is 206,940 votes for Representative Miller Meeks, and she's the incumbent against.
And she's what party?
Republican.
Republican.
Yeah, and which is against Christina Bohan, which is at 206,000 votes. So about 800 votes difference. So,
and that's about a 0.2% margin.
Yeah, so that's a state-funded recount actually. And then in California 13th, we're waiting to see what will happen between Durden and Gray, because the Republican leads about, I think, with less than 80 votes. Mm-hmm. And then we have California 45, which Tran leads about actually less. It was 36 votes last time I checked. And Alaska is having their recount, but Alaska also has ranked choice voting. So we're having results for that seat after this podcast is posted.
Mm. And it's very interesting, I think, for the Alaska District 1 race, which I think is their only district, funnily enough.
Yeah.
The Republican is leading. However, the incumbent is a Democrat. Was it Pelota?
Yes, Pelota.
Oh, yeah.
And what's interesting about that was I was looking at it and I was like, oh, like the Republicans didn't win. Like, what would be the difference? And then I looked into it. There is a third party that has 3.9%, and so and there's others that take up 1.3%. So there's about 4.2% out there that could really flip either way, and put Mary in the lead or Nick in the lead. So it's really interesting.
And Alaska is one of those interesting states where I think you tend to find a bit more of a less polarized state between the Republicans and Democrats. The Democrats seem to be more like Republicans and vice versa. And it's funny, I'm looking at your chart right now, the John Wade Howe, which is the Alaska Independence Party. It's a very interesting third fringe party that I think advocates for the total independence and separation of Alaska from the rest of the country, which I think is just hilarious to me that he even garnered, some 3.9% of the vote. I think it's interesting, the ranked choice voting. And I think it's also interesting, I think it's been talked about, you mentioning the ranked choice voting in Alaska, that the Republicans are thinking about actually removing it.
Yeah, it's actually, right now, when I was looking into it, it's leading to get removed.
Repealed
right now. So I think last time I looked, I didn't really look deeply into it. It was about 93 votes.
And do you know, what could be the possible reasoning?
For a Republican strategist point, it would be getting Republicans back on top. Because, where we got Pelota was because of ranked choice voting, where people were able to pick a third-party candidate, and then they picked, a Democrat as the second choice. And right now, if we didn't have ranked choice voting in Alaska, it would just be the Republican win right now. So it's definitely some more strategy in the sense of wanting to get Republicans back from that seat. Mm-hmm. So it's been really interesting, and I can't wait to see the results of that in the future.
Interesting. And then now looking over at the Senate, it's been established for a while now. McCormick did win Pennsylvania. So now we're at the GOP at 53, while the Dems are at 47. 47, and that includes, I'm pretty sure, it does. It includes the 2 independents, I think Angus King and Bernie Sanders, who are independents who tend to caucus with the Democrats. What's very interesting, continuing on the issue of the Senate, is that when talking about the Senate Majority Leader, Rick Scott did not win his bid. Instead, it went to John Thune, right? John Thune.
John Thune. Yes.
These names, a lot of names I got to remember in politics.
Yeah.
And John Thune is very staunchly much not within the MAGA pro-Trump camp. He's more of he's the definition, I think, of an establishment Republican.
Well, yeah. So I really think this is going to be interesting regarding Trump's cabinet picks, regarding the next, 4 years. We're going to see if there is a party that wants to govern, or there is still a divide in Republican politics. I mean, typically what you see when Republicans are in the majority in the House, it's hard because the party is so hard to get in line and like lock them in together because there's such variety. So, for example, I mean, we saw in the 118th Congress, people were splitting. There was the Freedom Caucus, and they were able to break off and get away from Kevin McCarthy. And then
they were basically able to hold up the entire system,
Yes.
just a small group of individuals, which is how the government is designed to be.
Yeah, and so right now what we're seeing is Kevin McCarthy, you know, he got impeached. And I can't wait to see this because the MAGA caucus, the Freedom Caucus, I would call it. It's called the Freedom Caucus, but I call it the MAGA caucus.
It's the same thing.
It's the
MAGA
same thing.
is freedom.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, you know, MTG proposed impeaching Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson now is cozying up to Donald Trump. And so I can't wait to see what happens in the sense of, like, will Mike Johnson be protected by Trump? Will Mike Johnson be more MAGA because now it's the running thing? And then will there be a Freedom Caucus equivalent to be anti-full MAGA movement?
I think that's going to be a very interesting thing, and even just a great dichotomy between the two chambers. I think what you'll see is a more Trumpy House and a less Trumpy Senate, where I think the Senate, led by John Thune, being this kind of compromise candidate against Rick Scott, you're going to see a Senate that's a lot more willing to oppose, I think, Trump than the Congress. And I think that this will really affect, especially his cabinet appointments.
Yeah. Right now, we're already seeing opposition for multiple candidates. And, you know, I think most of the time it's pretty valid, the opposition. I mean, you have Matt Gaetz that has an ethics investigation that is either not completed or they can't release it.
Yeah, so this is a very interesting thing. I was looking into this. So the House Ethics Committee launched an investigation, a formal investigation onto Matt Gaetz. They have findings. And they decided that the findings that they had are negative on Matt Gaetz. Now, here's the interesting thing. As per the rules of the House Ethics Committee, they can't release their findings if it's negative prior to an election. So, for example, when Matt Gaetz was up for his primaries, they couldn't release it if it could have a negative impact on the election. When he came up for the general, they still couldn't release it. And now that he's passed all these elections, they can now release the report. However, what Matt Gaetz did was, as soon as he was announced to be Trump's appointee for Attorney General, he relinquished his seat. And now that he's no longer a member of the House Ethics Committee can no longer, or I don't know if they can no longer, or it's a legally questionable whether or not they could rightfully publish the report on someone who's no longer a sitting member of the House. So from a purely strategic standpoint, what Matt Gaetz did was pretty interesting. He was able to skirt around what could be something very damning. We don't know the extent of the report, but the report was definitively negative. And the thing about it never being formally complete, yes, it was never formally completed because it was never like you know, that's at this point it's just a matter of typing up on the formal document and having it ready to give out, which it never reached that point. And at the look of it, I think it was announced just today that it looks like they won't be releasing the results in any capacity unless through a leak, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think the Senate will try to find some way. I mean, there's people openly being against the Matt Gaetz appointment and approval.
There was one prominent Democrat, I'm forgetting his name, said that there's about 5 to 10 senators, Republican senators, who said that they would vote against Matt Gaetz.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't blame them. So we're actually going to see maybe a big divide. And I actually see how many people are willing to say no to Trump and go against the MAGA movement. Because the cabinet appointments, typically they get no opposition. They're usually unanimously approved or, you know, approved by the party, you know, because this is your cabinet. You get to have that. Fine.
Right.
That's the people chose you. You get to have your cabinet. But Trump has picked some very interesting characters. And I bet there's been cabinet opposition in the past for, you know, either it was investigations or, you know, criminal, like just other things. So we'll see. And going off of that, I mean, there's going to be people asking questions about RFK and his vaccination stances. We already have, I think it was, the South Dakota Senator Mike Rounds, he says, look, I believe in vaccinations. I think they've saved millions of lives. If he has a different point of view, then he has to explain them to us. So there is going to be some pressing onto RFK. But other than that, it seems like most of the picks are fine.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think the two so far, of course, that have been announced that will have the most contention will be Matt Gaetz and RFK. I want to take a step back and focus a bit more on Matt Gaetz because I think he's a very, very important pick for a multitude of reasons, him being Attorney General. And then I think after we should talk about RFK, then go down the line of the rest, Dr. Mehmet Oz being the Medicare and Medicaid. We have a doctor, guys, so it's okay.
Hey, he has a PhD.
Okay, but going back to Attorney General Matt Gaetz, it is very interesting looking at a man who has been, accused of. I don't know exactly if he's been. I don't think there was ever a formal charge against him for, or not charge, but ruling on him being a potential pedophile or trafficker.
Biden's DOJ dropped it. I forgot what the reason was. The DOJ dropped it under the Biden administration. I don't know if that was because of political reasons of looking like they are persecuting people in the opposition party. But they did drop the investigation. So there has been no criminal charges on a technical, a technicality.
Matt Gaetz is at a very precarious situation, and I think a lot of the pushback against Matt Gaetz is rather interesting because on a character level, I would agree. I don't necessarily like him as a pick. Whether or not his accusations are true, I just find him to be a rather distasteful figure. One thing I would say about him that a lot of people charge against him is that he has never argued a case in his life before, which, I mean, it does hold some weight. But at the same time, there's been numerous attorney generals in the past who also have not done that. JFK, for example, appointed his brother RFK to attorney general, and he also had never argued a case before in his life. And RFK went on to be, I think, a rather solid attorney general for as long as he was.
Well, yeah, and I think what it is I think the attorney general, at most, argues on the behalf of the Supreme Court, or for as the government for the government on the federal level, if I'm correct.
Yes, he is the quintessential prosecutor of the government.
But other than that, I think you look at him as a manager of the DOJ and of the divisions within the DOJ, and they have a bunch of school prosecutors in there. So at first when I saw that, I was like, yeah, he has no experience, but it's more like, does he have an ability to either manage people and go, yeah, guys, go do this. You have your litigators, you have your resources, you have your investigators, and you have your lead DAs and your deputy attorney general. So I think that'll be fine.
Well, I would say, I think the fear with him is that within the DOJ, I think there's some 96 official prosecutors underneath what would be Matt Gaetz, and usually every election cycle, around 46 of them are Obama, for example, asked for the resignations of about half of them, the Republican appointed ones. I asked for the resignation of the Republican appointed ones. This is a normal thing. You have a flush out of about a certain percentage of the lawyers every time. I think the fear with Matt Gaetz is that he could be setting the agenda and weaponizing the DOJ, which is a view I personally don't subscribe to. But the fear is that with these certain picks, Matt Gaetz is the attorney general, more than the character. They're afraid he's a very anti-establishment. He'll use the DOJ as an attack dog and be retaliatory and vindictive. Others would view him as the guy who's going to clean house, who has been attacked by the DOJ. It's a very contentious issue.
I mean, I think Trump talked about him trying to clean up the DOJ. I just, it's speculation. We're going to have to wait and see with a Matt Gaetz and all of the cabinet members because, they're just kind of chilling right now, So
chilling.
They are chilling. They're chilling right now. But we'll see because it's a very interesting thing. But also, I want to point out a lot of these cabinet members, a few of them are in Congress. And with such a tight majority, I don't know how Elise Stefanik's district looks, but, it could be risky losing Elise Stefanik's. I mean, Matt Gaetz' district is, secure, but I don't know about Elise Stefanik's district. And it's going to be interesting. And we still have a lot of seats open. I mean, and that's what to wait on. I mean, I do think we have other picks like for defense. I think. Actually, you want to tell us about defense and open him up?
Okay, yeah, we'll jump into Pete Hegseth, and then eventually we'll get to RFK. We said we would, but we said we would do them, but we'll get to him. We'll get through a lot of these, I think, more contentious picks. Pete Hegseth is a really interesting guy. He went to Princeton studying politics, and then he got his master's from Harvard in public policy. He served in the National Guard, so he was a National Guardsman. And he was then afterwards a Fox News analyst.
No, contributor. No, he was a host, actually. Sorry. Okay. He was host on Fox and Friends, I believe.
He was a pundit at the very least. And he is very much, he takes very aggressive posturing. It's very interesting. What you see here with, I'll put this as a sidebar. I think what you see right now with the picks of Trump's cabinet, we might have one of the most, aggressive, but not like war hawkish, but aggressively posturing cabinet in terms of American military might, and also one of the most Israel supporting cabinets in recent, if not all, history. So it's going to be very interesting to see this kind of play out, where I think in the Trump faction there is a very strong American first isolationist wing that's very concerned with this sort of hawkish, almost neocon semblance cabinet. Yeah. And I think Pete Hegseth almost does personify a lot of this kind of fear of Trump embracing the neocon.
Well, yeah, I mean, I also want to point out something about some of the picks is that they're really not in the system. And then what I mean by that is, like, for example, Pete, he's not coming from the defense industry. He's not been in the military in the sense of like general, like in commanding.
Dr. Oz.
I mean, Dr. Oz. Like, a lot of these people are coming from either the private sector or having some experience. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard, I think she has some experience in the military. She did work on something that's related to, I forgot her commission, but it was related to doing foreign operations. And,
and I think it's really interesting. I think it's falsity to say that because they're not an insider with a lot of bureaucratic experience, it's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if you look at, you want to talk about like insiders in government not being great. Imagine if, for example, General MacArthur was appointed Secretary of Defense or something like that, wanted to urge for nukes in our Korea. The issue is that sometimes you have, like, especially in terms of like the defense, you don't necessarily want a general or an insider that much, because if you're someone within the military-industrial complex, they could be urging for, what's best for Raytheon, what's best for Halliburton, stuff like that. And the general, being in the loop with all the generals, they might be rather war-hungry with all his friends. And the whole point, I think, of the cabinet is that it's the civilian kind of oversight of all these, what do you call it? All these... the cabinet, like the departments. So yeah, departments. Yeah. All these departments, you need some sort of civilian oversight. They can take a step back and think about the boys at home. And I think that's what you do see with some of these picks. I do think that's kind of juxtaposed with a guy like Marco Rubio, however, as Secretary of State, who's been rather notorious for his rather aggressive posturing against Venezuela, against Russia, against Cuba, real anti-socialist takes. I think he could be rather concerning in terms of, definition of textbook career politician with a strong desire for, I think, toppling foreign governments.
Yeah, and it's just, I can't wait to see what happens. And, I think we have a lot of people. You always see typically loyalty, but I also like to talk about some of maybe the outsiders of the cabinet really quickly, like Vivek Ramaswamy, Elon Musk.
Is Vivek technically? He's not is he a cabinet pick technically?
No, they're not.
He's
So they're not going to be cabinet picks. They're going to be advisors.
Right.
I learned this from the great betting markets.
Okay.
And because they talked about the distinction, and they talked about like advisor is not necessarily a cabinet member.
Right.
Like a chief of staff is not something that you can confirm. Like that's why you'll see that under the list of no confirmations required, because
right.
They're just advisors, right? And so it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with that. But going back to that, I really want to talk about RFK because he's really interesting. Because I find it intriguing. The exact office is what again? The
Health.
health. Yes, and
I feel like he would have been better under the EPA.
well,
but
yes, and so that's what I want to talk about because he has a very strong history in the helping with the environment. I
the
mean,
Hudson River Cleanup Commission.
he led on that, and also there was a report that just has resurfaced from 2008 that Obama considered him for the EPA, and I don't think is a far stretch to put him in the EPA, as he was a very big activist, as he was a very respectable, and many people respected him.
And to be quite honest, if he was put in the EPA, he would be able to very easily bystep a lot of his statements on vaccines, on chemicals in certain foods. He would be able to effectively circumvent that by saying, "Look, I'm in charge of the environment. I want to make sure the environment's good to clean." And that's where he's strongest. He has a proven track record there on being very successful, and I think being very good. He would not have been, I think, a very polarizing pick had he been EPA. So I wonder, why was he put health, and why would somebody like Lee Zeldin be put in the EPA?
And actually, let's get Lee's. I'll get his background up really quickly, but continuing on to RFK, it's really just mind-boggling to me because I really feel that he's only made this health switch really recently. I mean, he was in the Trump administration. He worked on the vaccination research and criticism of vaccinations, and
Well, he wrote a rather large book detailing about the vaccine and some of its downsides, and I think about Dr. Fauci and the exact state of what COVID was. Very interesting thing about this. I was talking to one of my friends. This is going to be a bit of a sidebar tangent about COVID. I was talking to one of my friends the other day who's very into AI and stuff like that. And he was telling me about what the scientific consensus was about COVID, whether or not it was a lab leak or whether it came from a wet market. And he said at the beginning, everyone thought it was from the scientific consensus was that it came from the wet market. And everyone's really sure about that. And to even say that it came from the Wuhan lab was conspiracy theories. Around about a year or two ago, the consensus was about 50-50 on whether or not it actually came from the lab or it came from the wet market. And the reason because of it was because of its structure, its genetic structure indicated that it could have been the result of physical tampering. And now he said that as of recently, it's about 90-10 that it was just a wet market crossover from a bat. However, it's not totally out of the realm, or it's not totally within the realm of conspiracy theory to make the argument that it could have came from the Wuhan lab, but it most likely did come from the wet market because where the Wuhan lab was to the wet market, they were across the city from each other. Yeah. But because of certain structures of it, it's a little weird. So it is very interesting how, as of right now, it's pretty certain that it was from a natural occurring wet market jump transition from a bat to humans. However, the hysteria over it being a lab leak was a little overblown because for a while the academic consensus was it was about a 50-50. And I think it's just very interesting how we view RFK in this light, where we take him as most extremes on his vaccine stances, on his especially COVID stances. When I view him as a lot more personally I'm ambivalent about him. He has a track record that goes both ways. I think in amazing ways, and in some less to be desirable ways.
Yeah, and honestly, I have to read much more about him. The vaccine stats things are his his only really big concern to me personally. But other than that, as a really big point of why I'm really excited about RFK is he's going to bring cane sugar to all these corn syrup Coca-Cola products. But
on God,
but it's
great again.
I don't know, and we'll see. His vaccination stances are scary in some way. But we'll see what happens with that.
I mean, I'm not big on his vaccination takes. I do believe vaccines work. They tend to be doing very well. I think we could thank vaccines for not having to worry about measles or polio and other things. That being said, I do think some of his takes on chemicals is fair in terms of the amount of stuff that we're putting in our foods. He comes out with these YouTube videos every now and then where he's like, here's in Fruit Loops, right? Beautiful Red 40, Orange 7, and stuff like that. He's like, all this stuff is banned in Europe because they found out it's not healthy for you. Why is that? Why is that in our children's food here? And I think there is something to be said about that. I think there's something to be said about look at all the chemicals we have in our foods, and look at the increasing rates of this and this and this mental illnesses that are trying, or ADHD rates. And his argument, I think, centrally is, I think there's a real strong grain of truth to this. It's just the big corporations, they know what's best for your health, and they choose to ignore it for the profit. They're willing to put atrazine or whatever kind of weird chemicals they are if it means making your food look a little bit more like colorful, or if it means the food will preserve a little longer, even if there might be some down the road effects. And honestly, if there turns out to be negative effects, it's within the company's interest to keep it quiet so they don't get sued to hell and back. And I think RFK, he might be very, very hardlined, but you might need a guy like him to really shake things up. Let's not forget when Teddy Roosevelt started the FDA. The big corporations hated him. They thought it was unnecessary until we found out, how much gunk and trash and filth was going into our foods. Sometimes it takes a real hardliner to just get the ball rolling in the right direction when we've been looking away from it.
Yeah, I mean, going on to that point, I've seen this with our generation. For example, when I was at Boys Nation program, and we all get to present our own kind of bills of what we care about, there was a bill to ban like artificial flavorings, all these chemicals in our food. And so, and we've talked about this in other episodes about kind of the youths. During COVID, we saw a big health kick appear.
Health crisis.
Yeah, so like not health crisis.
Mental health.
Like not I'm saying like that. I'm saying a trend towards people wanting to be more healthy.
Healthier, yes.
And so I think that's kind of one of his appeals, and maybe we'll see that if we can uphold that. I think if there was a minister to, the FDA, of course, but I think if there was a better role that just focused on just that, I think he would have been perfect for that. Mm-hmm. And just we'll see how the Senate confirmation goes. I honestly think he's going to get in there. A question I want to ask you is, mm-hmm. do you think we have people that are very loyal to Trump, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that if Matt Gaetz doesn't get approved, or RFK doesn't get approved, or whatever doesn't get approved, do you think he'll wait 2 years into his administration to do a recess appointments and get them approved without Senate confirmation?
I find it hard to believe. Okay, so for Attorney General, no. I think that Attorney General is too important of a position to leave vacant for 2 years.
Yeah.
He will have to find someone to replace Matt Gaetz with. I think out of everyone here, Matt Gaetz has the highest likelihood of being turned down. RFK, there's a chance. I believe he will get through. But I think Attorney General is too important of a position to leave vacant within 2 years. So Trump will have to find a compromise candidate. And I don't really know. I mean, it's impossible to say. Let's say he does get turned down, Matt Gaetz. What's Trump going to do? He's going to put another firebrand and be like, look at your Republican Congress fail me. I don't know. I'd just probably be speaking out of my proverbial. I'd be smoke. I don't want to get this video. What do you call it? Explicit, and have our poor producer have to put the explicit sign over it. But I'm just speaking out of the top of my head. Like I don't know.
No, and I think that it would. In 2026, we have a bunch of senators up for reconfirmation. So
from pretty safe red areas.
Yeah,
though.
safe red areas.
The only real challenge would be like a MAGA, like trying to usurp them. But then you just get the spoil vote, and Democrat will get in.
Well, no, what I'm talking about, go Trump, because I think right now Trump has a lot of power, and not just because he has the House and the Senate, but he has the popular vote. He just won all 7 swing states in multiple different demographics that he's not expected to win. So, if he threatens the idea of going to a primary candidate and going, you know what, you may not vote for me now, and I'm going to find a different attorney general, but your next primary, I'm going to find some loyalists because I need people to vote with my agenda 100% of the time because this is my last time in office, and I'm trying to leave something.
I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. I think Elon Musk said he would fund every single primary or election that of a Republican who voted against Trump. He would fund every primary against them. I mean, it just really depends. Like, you have to you have to suppose a few things in order for this gamble to work. One is that there is a MAGA element strong enough within their home turf to usurp them. Two, Trump's popularity will retain to 2026, and that I think supposes everything hinges on the economic standings of that time. If economically everything works out by 2026, I think Trump is going to ride a super wave in 2026. I mean, if you just look at the states that are up for 2026, they're safe Republican. They can only pick up, really.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's only chances of Republicans picking up seats in 2026. I mean, the Democrat seats that are up are also like, it's just a new year, honestly.
And that's why I think that I think the Republicans, not the House, and the House is at the mercy of Trump, but the Republican Senate could stand against Trump very easily and very aggressively. I mean, I think Matt Gaetz is a litmus test on John Thune and the state of the Republican Party in the Senate. Yeah. And I think it's very easy that they will vote against Matt Gaetz, and then Trump will be like, you know, it might even be, Trump might be, I can't pretend to know what Trump might have picked Matt Gaetz as a test of the Republican Party, knowing that very well Matt Gaetz might lose, and he has his real pick behind Matt Gaetz. It's very possible. I can't tell you, but I mean, for how polarizing Matt Gaetz is, I wouldn't be surprised if Trump has a backup ready.
Yeah, no, I bet his advisors are telling him to have backups, you know, but it's going to be, I mean, like I said, are the Republicans going to be able to govern? Because they have the chance now to govern. There's nobody stopping them. If they all get in lockstep, they can pass a Senate border bill if they want to. They can drill, frack, and get all the oil they want to. It's just all people stepping together and not stopping it, not, you know, being like, well, I need this for my state, you know, and all that. So it's going to be really, like, I truly can't wait to see if we're going to see the fabric tear where we'll finally see these two different Republican parties. Because that's what people have talked about many times. If Trump fails, there'll be a new Republican Party. There'll be a split. But right now, we actually have a chance to see, is there truly splitting in the Republican Party? Or is the Republican Party going to stick together?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be very interesting. Or what you could see happen is, like, there'll be a lot of backroom dealings where maybe Trump will get Matt Gaetz in, but then the flip side is he might make some deal with the more moderate Republicans. We might or may not do this. There's going to be so much we won't see behind the scenes of the Republican Party. Now that they have the victory, like I said many times, the Republican Party is a broad church. It's a big tent encompassing a lot of people. And those people don't agree on everything. And you got a coalition build within your coalition. It's not enough to be the Republicans at 218 seats. It's not enough for the Republicans to be at 53 seats. Not everyone, no, you know, the Republican Party isn't merely a party of MAGA. It's anti-MAGA. It's a party of war hawks. It's a party of like isolationists. It's a party of debt hawks. It's a party of like big spenders.
Well, yeah.
It's It's not as unified as people like to say.
Well, yeah. I mean, we've talked about this. You know, like even when the 118th Congress, we had 15 rounds of a speaker trying to be confirmed, and then that same speaker got impeached. So. What?
And honestly, I think this is the greatest example of people fearing like a total like Trump destroying all the guardrails. It's a miracle how our checks and balances work, where a small coalition can hold up the entire party, can hold up the entire Congress. That's by design.
Yeah.
That's it forces it forces compromise. And yes, it might bring some compromise further to the extreme, but it can very easily do the opposite and bring the compromise back to the middle. I mean, think about it this way. That's like what caused the 118th Congress to hold up while electing the Speaker of the House was just a small wing of MAGA.
Yeah.
But now let's say it's reversed. Now it's mostly MAGA. Now if it's a small wing of anti-MAGA Republicans, the MAGA side will have to compromise with a less MAGA Speaker of the House. Like, it's a beautiful thing in my opinion.
Well, yeah. I mean, we don't know these races that we talked about at the beginning, but right now it would only take 5 Republicans and get the Democrats to vote in line with them to stop Congress and impeach a speaker. 5 Republicans. Think about that. So that's the thing is, if Iowa goes red and Alaska goes red, that's 220, and let's say California 215, it's still going to be a variation of like 5 to maybe 7 or whatever. So it's a very tight, majority. That has a lot of risk, that has a lot of different caucuses, that has a lot of different people from all over that have to bring back something in 2026. And with Trump's tariffs plan, if they have jobs that will be lost in those areas, they might not vote for his tariffs, and that's a very scary thing for them as well, because it will need congressional approval.
And I think talking about tariffs, I think now would be very interesting. This chart that I have up that talks about Trump's paths to enacting policies. When it comes to tariffs, like having a 20% tariff on all imports, whether or not it's 20 or 10%, it's up in the air, or the 60% tariff on Chinese imports, a 200% tariff on imported vehicles from Mexico. In order to do it, it would take executive action. He doesn't really need Congress to enact tariffs. And what he does need, though, for Congress is simply most of everything is taxes, not tariffs. That is, well, I mean, tariffs are a form of tax, but extending the 2017 tax cuts, lower corporate taxes, and to eliminate federal income tax.
Well, yeah.
This would be this is the most interesting, whether or not he can pull off eliminating federal income tax, if he actually will go for it. Because what I think would be very interesting is if you impose tariffs, it will lead to, at minimum, short-term inflation, especially if you're taxing raw materials. What you can do is if you eliminate federal income tax, you can effectively offset the cost of inflation by getting rid of a federal income tax. It could be very interesting if you do this little gambit. The question is, of course, could you get both done? Will it be successful? And how much may the government suffer? I mean, if you compare that whole thing, eliminating the federal income tax, but then also cutting the government down in size, if you do all this in tandem, you can see I think it could work.
I think that's hopeful thinking.
It's a lot of moving parts.
I would like to say, though, that he doesn't really he only needs congressional approval in the sense of lowering the tax to zero, right? Because he's not going to eliminate it, because he'll need an amendment to get rid of.
Right. It would be setting it to zero.
To zero. But it would be a very big populist movement.
Oh, it'd be extraordinarily popular.
I think we're actually going to see the strength of populism or the death of populism kind of in these next few years. And see if senators go, okay, I get it. People want the income tax, get rid of it, but we need it, or something like that. And I'm not saying this is not my belief. I'm saying I think you'll see these senators step back, or congressional, or the debt hawks, for example, be like, well, hold on. If you're not, it might be a negotiation even. They might be like, well, if you want to eliminate this income tax, I need you to cut spending in X, Y, and Z. So I think there's going to be a lot. That one thing will lead to a lot of negotiations. I forgot. I think it was a congressman. He has a literal debt thing on his shirt that he walks around with it every day, and it gets updated by the second. Yeah. So,
what I think is really interesting is that prior to the what amendment was it that established the income tax? Was it the 17th?
I think it was
17th was senators. It was 16th. Prior to the 16th Amendment establishing the federal income tax, 60% of the federal government's income came from tariffs. It could be very interesting. Like I said, this gambit. If he does this, Trump imposes tariffs, inflation goes up, people are hurting because of it. It's the short-term pain that he talks about, or everyone talks about. Trump then turns to the Senate and he turns to Republicans and go, man, your constituents are really hurting, huh? Well, you know how we could help them out? If we abolish the income tax. And if you don't, what does that say about you? If the rest of the party wants to do that and help alleviate the pain and you don't, it could be a very effective tool. And then on top of that, these debt hawks were like, well, in order to do that, you have to cut the government or, cut spending. Trump could turn around and be like, all right, perfect. Like Elon Musk or...
no, it's Elon Musk and
Vivek
Ramaswamy.
And Vivek. Like, all right, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. We need to slash more, find more inefficiencies. A lot of moving parts, but cohesively as a whole tactic, I think it could be very effective, rhetorically at least.
Well, yeah, I do, that's what I said. I do think Trump has a lot of strength.
Yeah.
He can play, he can use tariffs to then get congressional approval to lower income taxes to zero. It's just, I don't think Trump's a dumb guy. I'm just saying, does the Trump team have that strong of foresight And do they truly believe they can do something like that?
Well, I'll say if they don't have that foresight, they should hire me because I have that foresight. And then just if you even just double that down with if we just drill, baby, drill, the energy comes cheaper. You can offset a lot of these costs, I think, in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, you know, it's going to be really interesting. I wanted to also talk about other things. Like, honestly, I want to talk about some of the acts that will be used for...
Like, what kind of act?
Well, you know...
I see it on your computer.
See, I truly... You know, when I think about doing something and being so in the future, I really look to the past. And Trump's going to... It's a possibility that Trump's going to invoke the Alien Enemies Act
of 1798.
And so it's very interesting to me. We'll see. Like, but these are a lot of things. Like, what I see on this Bloomberg chart is the tariffs are going to be likely challenged by the courts. Right. The Fed policy that he's trying to talk about, maybe removing or demoting
Jerome Powell.
Supreme Court. A lot of these are going to be a very big Supreme Court fights that he's going to have to win. I mean, and deploying the National Guard, I forgot what the term was or what the court case or the bill it was. That's going to be a very big thing because there is a statute saying that we cannot deploy troops without like a Senate approval or congressional approval.
A formal declaration of like crisis or whatever by the Senate. Well, what's interesting here is a lot of people think that because the current judicial court, Supreme Court, is conservative in quotes. I don't like using the term conservative. There's no conservative or liberal court. It's strictly a strict court or a loose court in terms of interpretation. And the liberals tend to use a more loose interpretation of the Constitution. But I wouldn't call it like liberal or conservative. The law interpretation is not a liberal or conservative matter. But a lot of people think that because the Supreme Court has been heavily shaped by Trump, or that because it's quote unquote conservative, that it's just going to say yes to Trump on everything. That is not. I don't think that's going to be the case at all. I think they take a very literal meaning to the Constitution, and if Trump tries to pull any strings or tries to do anything that kind of stretches the meaning of the Constitution, they will strike it down, like how they did a lot of things already. And there already been rulings against Trump in several ways. I know people like to talk about the official acts case where it makes Trump a monarch, which it doesn't on official acts, but it just reestablished already established presidents, but. Simply put, the Supreme Court is very principled, and they will vote against Trump. I think on a good amount on certain of these policies. I think there's a very good chance that they will strike down Trump policies.
Well, I think if Trump does not deploy, or if he deploys the National Guard without congressional approval, the Supreme Court will most likely strike it down.
I agree.
And I mean, we've seen when Texas, for example, tried to put up barbed wire and try to do things, in which they did, and they lost their Supreme Court cases. I think what we're going to see is a challenge between those two. And let's say Trump pushes a little too much, we might not see Clarence Thomas or Alito step down even. Maybe if they're like, oh, I don't feel comfortable stepping down, you're going to point to people that will vote for you. Yeah. And so I do think it's a very interesting thing of, like I said, and like we've talked about, Republican Party is a tent. And even with the Supreme Court, they are very strict interpretationists. And they have voted against Republican policies time and time again. So it will be interesting to see the divide on the judicial and see how strong maybe the loyalty is tested.
Right.
How strong loyalty is tested in the Senate. How strong, like all throughout these things, it's a lot of loyalty. And if I think one of the things is that when you talk about these moving parts, I think Trump has to do a big thing of uniting the Republican Party, because that's the problem. The Democrats, when they have Nancy Pelosi, I think was one of the best speakers of the House politically, in the sense of when she had a vote went through.
Yeah.
When she had something to present, it went through.
She had the Democrats very much in order.
And the Democrat policies, other than socially, I think differ a lot. And maybe even on climate change with how far, they all still go towards the same direction of belief.
Deal.
And that's the thing is, I think with Republicans, you have people that believe in climate change, You have people that don't believe in climate change. You have people that believe, for example, Trump, that believe bump stocks shouldn't be allowed or bump stocks should be allowed. So the tent is going to be really shown, or the tent's going to be smashed and put into a building, and it's going to be, you vote in lockstep with me because we all go in the same building and we all go up the same elevator. There's no tent. You don't get to walk around. You're walking in this elevator and you're voting all the way up to the executive office, and you're approving my stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be very, very interesting, and I think there's not much to say. I mean, we're talking as if we know Trump, like we know exactly what he's gonna do. We know what exactly his plan is, but he hasn't even taken office yet. We have no clue what's gonna happen.
Yeah,
and the main thing is he has to unify the party. But I think the most interesting thing is that everything that he's doing is likely to be challenged by the Supreme Court, or just by a court. What exactly? What exactly will the courts agree with him on and find him unconstitutional? It's going to be extraordinarily interesting, and I think that'll be the essential questions of the next 4 years of Trump.
Yeah, and we'll see his first 100 days, and we'll see. And I think we'll be able to come back and speak on that.
Yes.
Or we'll get to speak on partly of it, because I think it is something that can move very rapidly. Mm-hmm. I mean, very rapidly we could see a deportation campaign happen.
Yeah.
Very rapidly we could see a Senate bill, a border bill being passed. Mm. And I mean, for me, I think when Trump had the mandate the first time, he was very effective. Let's not say it was good or bad, but very effective getting stuff through. But now that he has this mandate again, it's his last term. You're probably going to have people like J.D. Vance that are positioning themselves for a run in 2028.
Most definitely,
right? That will want the first 100 days to be fast, moving, and
well, the first 100 days will set you up pace wise for the next.
Because if his first 100 days are, and the deportations don't even have to be good for the economy in the first 100 days. It just has to show he's delivering,
right?
And so it's like, I did this. The campaigns start occurring.
Promises are being fulfilled.
Campaigns start occurring for the congressional members, because they're going to start raising money, because that's the endless cycle for Congress members. Right. Every 2 years, they have to start raising money, and they have to start looking to primaries. And if Trump's promises are delivering, and you can ride in the coattails of that, he's going to grow his power in the Congress and maybe even protect the House.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people do think the House is going to get flipped.
As it typically does.
But if Trump's able to show a very rapid moving thing or get a lot of the promises that he wants, mm-hmm. you will see him protect the House. I don't know if that will happen. I'm leaning towards he's going to lose the House, because a lot of these things are more than 100-day policies.
Well, we'll see if you fell for the Marxist trap or not.
Yes, as typically seen.
As our one lovely, really good professor, as one professor likes to proclaim. No, it'd be very interesting. I think one of the main threats to Trump is the economy, because I do think a lot of his policies will have an initial pain before you get the gain. And Trump has not made it very clear, like Javier Milei has done in Argentina, where it's going to be bad and then it's going to get good. So people voted with him understanding that. I think that Trump has not made that clear, and because of that, he could take an initial hit really hard if he doesn't clean himself up or clean the economy up by 2026. That being said, one last question, simple yes or no. I've been hearing this from a lot of people, and I'd be curious to take your take on it. Yes or no, in the first 100 days, there will be like a month or two of retribution and lawfare against the Democrats who tried to put him in jail.
I think if Matt Gaetz gets approved, I think there will be a Hunter Biden court case opening. Maybe, right? Maybe.
But will there be systematic retribution?
No. And if there is, I think we've talked about this. I think the Constitution is a lot stronger than Trump. I think the Constitution is something that is a beautiful piece of work that has been able to uphold our founding.
It's a piece of work.
It's a piece of work. We work as Americans. We have to work forward, and all of these court cases have juries. If the juries feel that, if they somehow are able to find political affiliation in all these juries and be like, oh, who would you vote for? And the judge doesn't dismiss that because that's not allowed, then it would be like, okay, yeah, then you could do that because it's not relevant to the cases.
Yeah, at the end of the day, as long as I don't think it will happen. Full disclosure. We'll see if we're right or wrong. We'll see very, very soon. I don't think it's going to happen. Even if there were to be court cases, are they not going to be tried by a trial of their peers or by a grand jury? The answer is they will. No president, to my understanding, has ever set up, knock on whatever material this is, kangaroo courts in the United States, mainly because it's not a winning platform to be doing that.
Yeah.
That being said, Trex, thank you for coming on to this episode today and talking about what we think is going to happen in the next coming months, really. He gets inaugurated in January, in like 2 months.
Yeah, January.
Wow.
So
It's going to be a very, very exciting and interesting next 4 years, most definitely. And thank you.
thank you.
Thank you for listening. This episode is brought to you by our producer, Miles Moorfield, and researcher, Michael Schur. This episode is also brought to you by the Ox Institute. For more information to keep up with them, follow them at oxinstitute.org. Thank you.